I spent several years studying different types of rituals, different types of methodologies, so to speak. And what one of my mentors told me, my main mentor when I was young, and I've spoken about this in other videos, but real magic or sorcery takes place in here. And I'll do a whole nother video about the psychology of magic. But I want to introduce some major fundamentals of it. The enemy doesn't like me doing this. Trust me. I get attacked, but the Lord protects me. It's a constant battle because I am divulging some of these experiences to you to either prevent you or to allow you to relate and have deliverance in these areas. Magic essentially relies on our five senses: sight, smell, touch, hearing, and tasting. That sounds weird, but our five senses, again, not in the order that I just gave them, but sight, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling. Now, I'll go through each of them just to give an example or to illustrate why I'm saying it relies on those five things, our five senses. But before I do that, I do want to point out that these five senses were first given to us by God Almighty. That's important to realize because supreme over the enemy is obviously the Lord. And so these five senses should first be considered something of a gift or holy. It's only when we abuse these senses that we allow and we consciously enter into dark realms. And sometimes we may not even realize how far we go into it. And the most common instances where we don't realize that are usually our sight and our sound, our hearing. But I'm going to go through all of them and I'll come back to that in just a moment. So the big one is our sight. There's parables and there's instances within the Gospels about being blind or regaining our sight. Our sight is one of the biggest things. And that's not to say that those who are blind or who have loss of sight and for normal or genetic or instances in their lives where they've lost their sight are any less of a person, by no means. However, even they will recognize that it is a loss or it is something that they wish they could regain. And the reason is our sight allows us to perceive things in a three-dimensional way. Obviously, dimension, three-dimensional. I don't want to get too far into the rabbit trail of that. But in terms of magic, what usually happens is one of the most famous and kind of surface types of magic are color magic, oftentimes with candles or other tools. I'm just using candles as an example to demonstrate what I mean by magic or sight, magic through sight. So different colors will oftentimes cause us to think about things unconsciously. And a very obvious explanation of that are things like red. When we see something red, it kind of it draws us to things of anger or excitement or urgency. When we are driving a car and we come across a stop sign, what is the color of the stop sign? Red. And that is to tell us, hey, hold on. Ha! It's kind of yelling at us. It's red. And so oftentimes in magic, rituals or incantations or whatever methodology ceremonially, red will be something that will cause us to feel a certain way. Opposite of that is blue. And there's all kinds of attributes to these different colors: green, gold, and trying to evoke things of money or wealth. And there's a whole system of candle magic, but it just is a tool to excite some of our unconscious ideas. On another level, there's things of sexuality. Now, those of you who have been in the occult can very much identify. If you've been in a ritual, this is a very divulging secret, so to speak. Oftentimes, there may be some nudity in your ritual. And what is the purpose of that? Well, especially with men, maybe sometimes with women, but especially with men, the purpose is to conjure up these ideas and sensations. If you can see something, i.e., nudity or something graphic, it stirs something up inside of you. And there's a number of different examples. The point that I'm making is that one of our senses, being sight, is one way that magical rituals will employ these things to feed our unconscious, to get to a certain level within or to get to a certain state of mind, so to speak. I can talk in length about that or discuss that in much more detail, but I want to move on to some of these other senses. Sound. This is a hearing, our sense of hearing. This is another major thing that is used within magic. Primarily music. This is a big, big, big thing. There are certain formulas or equations, for lack of a better term, within music that can inspire us to do things. Now, there have been news reports and back in, I don't know, maybe as early as the 60s, 70s, 80s, where people would commit crimes and they would attribute the different types of music that they would hear that would encourage them to do certain things. And later they recanted and took back those types of confessions. But whether they admitted to it or not, or whether those songs or music actually caused them to do the crimes that they did, it inevitably had some influence to at least get them to a point to do those things. So I'll draw this back into magic specifically. So if one is engaging in a certain type of ritual, they will likely have some type of background music or chanting or just some type of steady monotone beat, because we respond to these sounds in a way that we wouldn't normally respond in everyday life. And so these sounds help us get to a point psychologically, emotionally, spiritually that we wouldn't necessarily go to. And so the understanding is that within magic, there is a need to facilitate that sense within us. Now, I want to just take one quick little detour to explain that music is so powerful. It is something that we need to be on guard 24/7, because traditionally or not, Lucifer, the angel, Satan, essentially, was considered the angel of worship, the angel of music. And I am still a firm believer, some may disagree with me, secular music is far more, I don't know the right adjective that I should use, but there's far more appeal, talent, so to speak, within secular music than in religious or godly music. That's just one unique opinion that I have. And the reason I say that is I think it is a territory that the enemy, Satan, can capitalize on to deter God fearing, righteous people because it is so appealing and there is a lot of talent within it. That's not to say that good, godly music is not good. No, I wholeheartedly listen and embrace a lot of good worship music. It's just that there is something to be said about how extremely different and appealing sometimes secular music can be. All the more reason to be on guard. All the more reason to recognize and pray for discernment to avoid being trapped into that. But again, getting back into magic specifically, the point is that when we hear certain tones, certain beats, certain types of musical formulas, we unconsciously respond. We unconsciously are drawn to that type of sound, what we hear. Again, another area that I could talk in length, but moving on. Smell. Now, the one thing that I try and relate, because some people will say, well, smell, what do you mean smell is this one thing for magic? Yes. For those of you, some of you may not be able to relate to this, but I know that as old as I got, my grandmother, who's now passed away, would make certain types of potatoes in her home. And the way that she made it in a cast iron pan and certain seasonings, it was a distinct smell that made an aroma throughout her home. Certain other types of foods that she would make, or some of my other relatives would make, they permeated through the home, and it brought a lot of memories throughout the years of what happened. It conjured up these ideas and images in my head. And that's the closest thing that I could try and give it as an example. Because within, again, magic rituals specifically, there are things like incense that are used. A whole variation of incense. In fact, when I first started getting into the occult, or in my early days, one of the things that my mentor had showed me in his shop, he had a whole big wall full of incense and uh, a whole combination of things that he would teach me. Well, you do this and you do that and you do this and you do that with these certain types of things, and they're supposed to cause whatever to happen. The point was just to excite certain smells within us. Another example would be perfumes. Why do you think there is a whole industry of perfumes, whether it's colognes for men or perfumes for women, to try and draw people together? So the sense of smell is a very, very, very powerful uh, sense. Moving on. Touch, tactile. This again is another sensitive area. So there are times where you would use a dagger to draw blood because you're exciting the nerves. It's a very real experience. You're drawing your own blood, whether in your hand, your arm, anywhere. You're feeling firsthand what it is that you're engaging in a magical ritual. The other example would be, again, kind of the nudity. If you're able to feel something and your tactile senses to things, not to get too graphic, but that sense of feel and touch causes you to come to a certain unconscious state of mind, to be able to physically engage in these things. If you're using certain types of robes, you feel the cloth within you, are on top of you, on your body. You're in a different type of feeling of things. You go, if somebody lays their hands on you in a type of rite of passage or a type of ceremony to raise you, in occult terms, to a new level, you're feeling the actual energy and heat from another person to you. It's a very powerful experience to have that one-on-one touch of either another person or another object that's placed on you. Your nerves, your neural connections respond to wherever that is. Or if you're getting oil touched on you in a certain way, on your head, on certain types parts of your body. And lastly, let's see, I've done sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. Now, this may not be as used in the other senses, but when it is, it's similar to smell. And even science will back this up. When we eat something, a lot of times what we taste is what we smell. We're kind of basic or primitive in that way, in that sense. What we taste relies a lot on our smells. So those two senses are kind of very well connected. But the idea of tasting certain things will, in a lot of ways, activate that same type of sense of being drawn to something. If it is a bitter taste, it causes us almost to kind of be angry. Again, kind of reverting back to seeing the red stop sign or red things. It causes us to be a bit angry. If it's sweet, we are a lot more apt to be pleasant with it. We embrace it more. The kind of example that I would give for those of you, I was never Catholic, but there is still something to be said about taking the wine or grape juice with bread that is symbolic of the communion. And so, in some ways, that's the closest that I might be able to relate to those who don't know much about magic, is that you do physically taste the bread, you taste the wine, and in certain magical circles, so to speak, there is a sense of drinking wine or being intoxicated with certain types of liquor or spirits, excuse the pun, that allows you to have all of these, to kind of complete all of the senses. And so when there is a ritual, a magical ritual that takes place, this is not as prevalent, so to speak, of the senses, but in order to complete it, in order to complete all of these five senses, oftentimes there may be wine or liquor that is consumed in order to complete the excitement, so to speak, or the initiation, excuse the term, of all of your senses. The activation that you have: sight, smell, touch, hearing, tasting. All of these are what essentially we are made of. And if all of these can contribute to our unconscious activation to do something, then they are utilized in every way that they can be. Now, that is just for the practitioner, the person who actually engages in these things. Now, it could either be the solitary practitioner, usually a sorcerer, or it can be done in a communal ritual. Unfortunately, I have an extensive background and history of both of these scenarios. And in each of those scenarios, whatever system you utilize, most of the time, with rare exception, I say so rare because I can't think of any offhand, because most occultists or most practitioners will probably relate to this. And if you're watching this, you're probably saying yes, 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 and yes. I did X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z, and did all those things in some way, shape, or form, because that's typically what is required in order to carry out certain types of magical rituals, whether it's a solitary practitioner or a corporate ritual. Your five senses are utilized within magic. Now, to a larger degree, if a solitary practitioner uses these things, he knows full well what he is employing to give to a receiver of them. But sometimes he may not, or somewhere in between. And the example that I've given before that I think is still pretty relevant is a marketer, a business marketer. Somebody who understands marketing will understand how to utilize all of these senses in order to cause that change to occur in conformity with his will. What I mean is, all of the commercials that are on your computer screen or TV screen, all of the music that is out there playing on your car radio, the subtleties that are presented to you in $1 billion industry, $1 trillion if you really think about it, utilize your senses as a magical tool to influence you. This is again kind of coming full circle, what we're told about in Scripture. It is not flesh and blood. It is not flesh and blood that we fight against, but against the principalities of the air. Folks, there are blatant magical rituals that are done in order to achieve a certain result. And there are things that are a little more subtle that are out there. But they utilize our five senses in some way, shape, or form, either individually or in combination. I wanted to address in this video how magic uses all five of our senses in a certain type of ritual or way to cause things to occur. But in practice, a very knowledgeable or savvy marketer or person of influence can focus on one or two or three or all of these senses in order to cause the change to occur for their gain. So I want to end this by one, giving you some type of education in how magic works, but also above and beyond that, to warn you about these things, to guard yourself against these things. Be sensitive to what you perceive in your sight, what you look at on your computer screen, your TV screen, what you look at in your society. And lastly, give praise and focus on the Lord. Do not take what I am saying as some type of way to be paranoid about every little thing that happens in the world. If you focus on the Lord, if you truly are repentant of your sins and your own shortcomings, He is faithful to forgive you. This is a more educational video, but I want to emphasize the grace and the faithfulness of the Lord to guide you through this. And that our five senses are something that He gave us. He designed us with these senses. And the only reason that they become magical influences is when we lose sight of Him and when we allow the enemy to control them in a nefarious, evil way. That's why, above anything else, I urge you to stay focused on the Lord.